Greetings, Pokey fans! Michael here, and most Pokemon stats make sense. Zacian has really high attack because it wields a giant sword. Dragapult is extremely fast because it's based on super fast aircraft. And these are just two of many examples. But what about Pokemon stats that don't make sense? What about Pokemon who have a stat that seems to clash with their biology, or have higher or lower stats than another Pokemon that they really shouldn't? In today's video, I will be covering 15 examples of Pokemon stats that don't make sense and are therefore quite surprising in no particular order. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel and tap that bell for notifications, you know the drill. And let's get started with number 1, Vikavolt is slower than Grubbin. This is a pretty infamous one. Vikavolt is a constantly flying bug that is described in the Pokedex as being able to zip around and execute acrobatic flying maneuvers. So, it sounds like it should be pretty freaking fast. But nope, it's not even close. Vikavolt has a base speed stat of only 43, which is quite slow. It means that this creature that can supposedly zip around is slower than Caterpie, Dunsparce, and its own pre-evolution Grubbin. It's ridiculous, and it's sad, and I hate it. The next entry also has to do with speed, but instead of a Pokemon being surprisingly slow, it's a Pokemon that is surprisingly fast. That being number 2, Purugly is faster than Latios and Latias. Purugly is a pudgy cat that uses its own tail to squeeze itself in such a way to look more buff. I would never in a million years expect it to be fast, but as it turns out, it has a base speed stat of 112, which is very high. For comparison, Latios and Latias both have a base speed stat of 110 in both their regular and mega forms, which means that this overweight cat is somehow faster than a Pokemon said to be faster than a jet plane. Passenger airliners fly at 550 miles per hour. Imagine owning a pudgy cat that was faster than that. All right, we've done 2 entries about speed, now let's do some about power, starting with some Pokemon that are surprisingly weak. The first of which is number 3, Onix has lower attack than Sentret. While Onix is a famous Gen 1 Pokemon, well known for its massive imposing size and seems like it could crush you with minimal effort, its stats have always been terrible. Its defense is great, but the rest of its stats are poor, the most surprising of which is its attack, which is only base 45. Meanwhile, Sentret, a weak Gen 1 rodent, has a base attack stat of 46. That means an Onix and Sentret at the same level with the same IVs, EVs, and nature both used a physical attack that they did not gain stab from. Sentret would do more damage. I did the calcs. It literally does a bit more damage. A tiny little ferret thing hits less hard than a giant snake made of stone, because that makes sense. Another surprisingly weak Pokemon is a legendary Pokemon. That being number 4, Regice has a lower attack stat than Sewaddle. Regice is a living chunk of ice, so I wouldn't expect it to be fast. I would expect it to be a solid mass of ice. And while I'd get it if it was better on the special side due to skillful energy manipulation, I'd also expect it to have decent attack. After all, ice is super heavy. If it smacks you, it's going to hurt. But apparently Regice missed this memo as it only has base 50 attack. Meanwhile, Sewaddle, a cute little leaf-covered caterpillar, has a base attack stat of 53. That means if this living chunk of solid ice slammed into you, it would hurt less than if this tiny little caterpillar did. All right, one more entry about a Pokemon having surprisingly low attack. That being number 5, Bastiodon has lower attack than Tynamo. Like with Onix and Regice, Bastiodon is a big, heavy, solid creature. Even if it can't move fast, I would expect it to be able to dish out a decent chunk of damage on the physical side simply by smacking things with its rock-solid face. But apparently not, because it only has a base attack stat of 52, which is also lower than Sewaddle, like Regice, but I wanted to bring up Tynamo as well. Tynamo has a base attack stat of 55, meaning this feeble little baby eel with a base stat total of only 275 can hit harder than a metal and rock dinosaur. Alright, so those were a few surprisingly weak Pokemon, but now let's talk about some that are surprisingly strong. The first of which is number 6, Trapinch has higher attack than Poliwrath. You heard me correctly. Adorable little Trapinch hits like a truck with a base attack stat of 100. But I suppose we shouldn't be too surprised by this. After all, its dex entries say that its jaws are strong enough to crush boulders. Crush boulders! Break them into pieces. But Poliwrath, a Pokemon whose muscles are so impressive that it can swim across the Pacific Ocean without getting tired, can supposedly turn boulders to dust with just one punch. That seems more impressive, right? Well, apparently not. Poliwrath only has base 95 physical attack, and prior to Generation 6, it was only 85. It seems crushing boulders is more impressive than turning them to dust. So, there you go. Life lesson for today, kids. Another surprisingly strong Pokemon, but this time on the special side, is number 7. Abra has higher special attack than Greninja. Greninja is known for being one of the biggest competitive threats in the last few generations. It's fast and hits hard, hitting even harder thanks to Protean giving it stab for everything. But while base 103 special attack is pretty good, Abra is even better. Abra has base 105 special attack, meaning it is capable of doing more special damage than a regular Greninja is, assuming stab is not a factor. Greninja is not weak. Abra is just weirdly really strong. The next weirdly strong Pokemon is back on the physical side. That being number 8, Flareon has the same physical attack stat as Machamp. Machamp is the poster child for fighting type Pokemon, a type associated with high physical attack. It's got big muscles, 4 arms, and can hit hard enough that it can punch victims over the horizon. I actually did a whole video on that statement several years ago, and I calculated how much force was necessary to punch a person over the horizon. And it's a lot. Yet somehow, this cute little fire fox cat thing hits just as hard as Machamp does. Both of them have base attack stats of 130, which is huge. Machamp I get, but Flareon having that is just strange. And remember how I said that the fighting type tends to be associated with high physical attack? Well, apparently that wasn't always true, because not a single Gen 1 fighting type Pokemon has higher physical attack than Flareon does. Machamp is the highest one of all the Gen 1 fighting types, and it just ties with Flareon. On the topic of evolutions, there's another one that has an absurdly high stat that, to me, doesn't make any sense. That being number 9, Leafeon has higher defense than Crustle. Crustle is a hermit crab whose shell is a literal chunk of the earth. It's extremely durable, and much like a lot of rock-type Pokemon, it has excellent physical defense, with a base stat of 125. But Leafeon, a relatively skinny cat-fox thing that's partially made of leaves, can supposedly withstand physical hits better than this Pokemon wearing a chunk of the earth. Leafeon has a base defense stat of 130, tied with Flareon's physical attack, and that is just ridiculously huge. Now, all evolutions have one base stat that is extremely high, base 130 like Leafeon and Flareon, but to me, the others make sense. Espeon has great special attack, sure. Jolteon, super fast, that makes sense. Umbreon, good special defense, yeah. Special darkness powers make it specially bulky, I get it. But Flareon hitting as hard as Machamp, and Leafeon taking physical hits, as well as a Crustle, is ridiculous to me. For the next entry, I'll stick with the bulk theme. That being number 10, Wailord has lower defense and special defense than Joltik. Wailord is the biggest Pokemon in the game. Joltik is tied with several others for the smallest. Yet somehow Wailord's base defense stats are lower than Joltik's, with Wailord's being 45 and Joltik's being 50. This is insane to me. Now, Wailord does dwarf Joltik in the HP stat, so Wailord ends up being bulkier, but still, the smallest Pokemon beating the biggest Pokemon in any defensive stat, much less 2 of the 3, is ridiculous. Another bulk-focused entry is number 11. Dusknoir has lower HP than Yungoos. Dusknoir is a big, beefy ghost, and while that is reflected in its great defense stats, its HP is lackluster by comparison, being only 45. Yungoos, however, a Route 1 weak rodent, has base 48 HP. This is another situation where Dusknoir still wins in overall bulk, but again, like with Wailord and Joltik, Dusknoir losing to Yungoos in any defensive stat is very surprising to me. My final bulk-focused entry has to do with 2 Pokemon that are a part of the same evolutionary line. That being number 12, Nincada has double the defense of Ninjask. Now, if you were to tell me that Nincada simply had higher defense than Ninjask, I wouldn't be that surprised. Nincada is a slow-moving, burrowing Pokemon, so it makes sense that for it to survive in the wild, it would need to have good defense. Meanwhile, Ninjask is famously fast and frail. It doesn't need to take hits well because if it can't beat an opponent, it just runs away. Also, it's not unheard of for an evolved form to have some stats that are lower than its pre-evolved form. Porygon Z has lower defensive stats than Porygon 2, despite having a higher base stat total. So again, Nincada having a higher defense than Ninjask would not be a crazy thing to hear. What makes it so crazy is the size of the difference. Ninjask has base 45 defense, while Nincada has base 90. Double the number. That is more defense than many Mega Evolutions and Legendaries, including Lunala, who only has base 89 defense. Who knew that Nincada took hits so well? I did not. This blew my mind. Alright, so that wraps up the bulk-focused ones, and the last few entries will focus on multiple stats at once. The first is number 13, Solrock has higher physical attack than special attack. Solrock is a rock psychic type Pokemon, and at the time of its release in Generation 3, rock was always physical and psychic was always special. To compensate for this unique combination, Game Freak decided to make Solrock a physical attacker and Lunatone a special attacker. But even though I get the reasoning, it still doesn't make sense to me for Solrock to have higher physical attack. It's a magic cosmic rock from outer space that controls cosmic energy and has psychic powers. It gets power from the sun and can fire off solar beams, a move that has always been special. Solrock using Power Gem makes a lot more sense intuitively for me than it using Rock Slide. But nope, Rock Slide would do more damage. Even after the physical special split in Generation 4, Solrock has remained a physical attacker, which to me doesn't make sense. The last 2 entries will focus on base stat totals. The first of which is number 14, Munchlax has a higher base stat total than Dustox. Most baby Pokemon have low base stat totals. Azurill has 190, Pichu has 205, Togepi has 245. But Munchlax is the king of the baby Pokemon with a surprisingly high base stat total of 390, which is pretty respectable, especially for a baby Pokemon. Its HP is mostly what carries it, but still, 390 is impressive. It's more than several fully evolved Pokemon, including Dustox, the end of a 3-stage line, which only has 385. Speaking of Dustox, it is part of the final entry. That being number 15, Dustox and Politoed have lower base stat totals than their counterparts. Dustox has a base stat total of 385, as I just mentioned, but Beautifly has 395, a 10-point difference. Politoed has a base stat total of 500, while Poliwrath has 510. That's weird, right? If you think that branched evolution Pokemon would have the same base stat totals, then you would be right for virtually all of them. The only exception, other than the ones I just mentioned, is Ninjask and Shedinja. But honestly, should that even count as a branched evolution? It's a weird split-off thing, not just choosing between one or the other. All the other split evolutions, like Huntail and Gorbis or Gardevoir and Gallade, have the exact same base stat totals. So why are these particular pairs different? Well, it turns out they weren't always. Upon release, they did have the same total, but then in Generation 6, Beautifly and Poliwrath got 10-point stat buffs to their special and physical attack stats respectively. That means that half of these pairs got buffs, while the others did not. Do I know why? No, and I don't have any guesses because it doesn't make any sense. Thank you so much for watching, and an extra special thanks to my patrons over on Patreon, who are helping support the channel independent of fluctuating YouTube ad revenue, which is more fluctuating due to the current economic situation. So if you want to help support me and the channel and get some cool perks in exchange, the link is in the description below. Also, if you want to check out some more of my fun Pokemon content, I recommend these videos here. All right, that's all I have for now. So till next time, Poke fans, gotta catch them all.